Alright, I have finished making the construction drawings for your proposed covered screen deck project. Took them as far as I could. They are ready to apply for a permit, although as will be revealed in the film, there are some issues with the well. Some of this information is more for the builder, but it does, toward the end of the film, it'll show you what the structure looks like under its current, under what these plans are showing. So good luck. I'm sorry it's so long. So based on my dimensions that I took out there to your fence and various points, this was the closest I could get to an accurate plot plan, and I think it's accurate enough. This is the 50-foot for R1A. This is zoning district, 50-foot rear yard setback line, but all of this open frame porch stuff is apparently allowed to project beyond that. So we are good there. And the building's designed as close as it can be to what we took with our dimensions out there for the existing building. And I just now noticed that I had done a series of recordings back on the 19th of May with regard to this well and my investigations of it and how it was going to impact our project. I'll shift those in here and then return to this. This is from Wisconsin, and they say 2 feet from the center of the well to any permanent projection, even the eaves, and that's in Wisconsin. But then they go on to say a deck, which is exactly what ours is, may be built over a well if it has a removable hatch. Then there is this from Minnesota, and they are a little more serious in that they require a 3-foot separation. In order to have access and keep the well safe, a building addition, overhang, deck, canopy, or other structure may not be built over or within 3 feet of any existing well. And of relevance is this section here. At least in Minnesota, the access hatch is not an acceptable alternative, so I will find out. So we'll see what Ohio or what Greene County says. But this was a nice little learning thing here, and I assume this is exactly what we have there. In any event, it looks to me like the only thing they ever have to do really is be able to pull this thing out of here and change it. But I will find out. And we now know that Greene County has, they finally responded to my telephone messages, and this was 10 days out, but they finally got back to the second message, and their rules, the rules in Greene County, are that you can't build closer than 5 feet to this well. And by the time we're said and done, I finished this design waiting for them to come back, but by the time we're done, we're within inches of this well. So there is a mechanism, a variance mechanism, and I think our chances are actually pretty good to prevail in that and build this as I've designed it. If not, there are probably an alternative or two. I have not explored those until we see which way we want to go with this variance. And since we now know that this might be a route that you elect to go, I will cover right now, interject here and cover right now why I think our chances of prevailing in such a hearing are favorable. And these mitigating and aggravating factors, these aren't listed in any kind of particular order, but just as they occur to me, the various things that can argue in our favor. For one, this deck, I don't know if you guys built this or whoever built it. I don't know if it was permitted, but in any event, it was existing, and it is, including a footing, is certainly very close to this existing well, like this. And secondly, we don't have the opportunity to go left. Well, the well is there, so we can't go left over that. And to move right 5 feet, we move out of the range of joining this to the building. So you, during your occupancy here, have had the quiet enjoyment of this space built very close to this well without apparent impact, and having no reason to believe that a replacement deck built in this same kind of footprint extending this way and that way would be disqualified for any reason. So those were just a couple of the things that occurred to me offhand with regard to what you've got and where we want to go with it. And then where we went with it, I'll go over here to this floor plan. I think there's some other things that help us there as well. And I had done a lot of that well exploration because I know that you had said, Janet had said, she thought that this screen porch was going to be situated inside on this side of the window, on the east side of this window, to permit light to continue to come in that window. And so I had first investigated this whole well issue because really for no more than a person needs to get in there, and the fact that this was going to be a deck, I felt it'd be a pretty simple thing to put a hatch over that. And this is this original 14-foot wide addition that was planned here, and it's not going to situate upright, but I thought we could shift that over to the left and build out over that well. Now no, that's definitely not possible, and I thought because of the Minnesota rules it would not be. So I went forward and designed this starting from that 14-foot wide precept and capturing the door to the kitchen. This was the foundation plan we ended up with, and there's the well. And our closest pier structure, closest foundational structure, is 3'6" from the center of the well, which exceeds both Wisconsin and Minnesota's requirements. Not that that's relevant in Ohio, but it's something. And then the next one is 4'6". And there is their 5 foot, that is Greene County Health Department's 5 foot requirement there, with some of our footings well within that, but still fairly well off of that well and further from it than the existing foundational structures. On the second level, on the first floor, we are obviously built very close to it by the time this is the edge of our decking here. So we are built very close to it, and maybe there's a 1-inch adjustment made this way on the fly, depending on how these dimensions add up or work out. But this column here is built on top of the deck. That doesn't extend down, and so conceivably or arguably, if a person had to, they could remove enough of this structure to allow access, but I don't see that kind of access being needed from our prior investigations of how these wells work. While I'm here, by the way, the rafter spacing, this was called out because of a go-in dimension of 20 feet projection here. And we ended up with a rafter spacing to have them make sense with what's happening along the walls. We ended up, these pink ones are the rafters. We ended up with a rafter spacing of 29.25. If you wanted a more standardized, like 32 inches on center for those, we would have to extend this deck another, we'd have to extend it quite a bit. So that is the reason for the oddball rafter spacing, but they do tie in with what's happening on the columns on the side. So those were the mitigating, aggravating factors. I think the thing looks very nice from outside. It isn't any different from the existing deck. Well, it does have the soffit, but otherwise it's very similar to what currently exists. So we also knew that we couldn't just have this like this because we have the centaur screen that's dying against the house right where that window is. So something had to happen, and the something was making that addition slightly wider to capture both the window and the door. And so from a 14-foot wide footprint out to out, we end up with a 16-foot wide footprint to capture both of these. Otherwise, we're down below 10 feet or so, coming inside this window and just having its overhang come over it. and this necessarily pushes the deck. This is if a 10-foot deck were put out beyond that 16-foot structure, and it kind of cuts off this and is a little goofy with this window. So at least until we know more from you, the owner, I am showing that deck extending beyond that window well. So light in that window well is lost for all intents and purposes. The next thing that came up, though, after getting all this sizing, the next thing that came up in the next issue was how to connect these rafters to this, how to clad those with lumber to make them look right. And a lot of this discussion was because I was kind of building this model taken from this photo that Kim had sent over. So some of that discussion with the connection of these rafters and the finishing them was based on this photo, and I was under the impression that this was all to be stained. So there was a challenge of how to do that and how to make it look good without it becoming too labor intensive. This was before I realized that the only thing planned on being stained was the tongue and groove decking on top of the roof. So these can all be painted. And this is if we were to use an LVL, but you would have to clad that as well. And these are the connectors, neither of which are going to be working for holding those rafters on. So there was quite the go back and forth with what sort of connection and how we would do this, connect them. And there were no real good answers with any of that right offhand. So we ended up using a glue lamb, figuring that can be stained for appearance grade, and it can be painted too, painted more handily than an LVL can. So from that point forward, we went with a glue lamb here and had our rafters come up and sit on top of it, something like this. And then there was an investigation of whether these rafters could be straight up raw cedar that could be stained like the ceiling and like some of the other things. Eventually, based on the idea that that was all going to be stained, we ended up using, or planning on using, solid sawn 4x rafters, 4x6 rafters, and the glue lamb at the top stained, and the rafters stained, and the ceiling stained. But now these rafters are probably still going to be 4x6s, but they can be painted. And because of that earlier photograph that I showed you, this was kind of the construction here, where this top plate would be some sort of appearance grade pine, #1 pine or whatever, that could be stained as well. So I'm going to try to make this film not too long. The height of this beam, the height of the bearing here, was called out from the bottom. This is the Centaur screen that you're seeing in section here, and this is the bottom of its top crossbar, is called out above the level of this casing here. So that is how to calculate your bearing. It's about 8'4½" to the top of this. These are the 7.5-inch LVLs, not quite in the situation that we're going to end up, but I ended up specifying LVLs on this side and southern yellow pine 2x8s on the other side. What is important to know, though, is that with this kind of cladding here, if these are 7 1/4 and we have this at the bottom and this at the top, this an 11 1/4 will not quite meet this. So I ran a custom depth check on those LVLs, and my suggestion, if you want to run straight 1x12 on the inside, and I think this ends up as a 1x10, but in order to get this 1x12 to die up underneath that ledge without horsing around, you would need to resaw both your SYP on the left and these LVLs on this side down to 7 inches. I'm not showing that on the plan. I'm showing it at 7 1/4. But those should be resawn to 7 if you want to use straight 1x12 on the inside. Additionally, this bottom piece is not needed. I finally designed this where the two LVLs are against one another with the connectors in the center, and then you padding those out 7/8 or so, and then putting your 7/8 cedar on top of them. That bottom one is really not needed. It just spurs you down away from that that hardware. And I did so much with the various beams on this before I finally settled on what to do with the 7-inch LVLs. 2 5s pass, but with a deflection of almost 3/8 of an inch. With that Centaur screen, I wasn't sure about that. So I ended up with 2 7s across that, reducing the deflection to less than 3/16. This is quick here because we're going to be making a bird's mouth at the top of these rafters. I did run, and these could actually be 4x4s, so we will still have 4.5 inches of wood above our bird's mouth, which will still pass for rafters because 4x4s will actually pass. We are using 4x6s though to get that notch out, and 4x4s would look a little weak. Here's where we project over that window well, and if you don't want that, you can see that your deck is going to be cut down in this region to about 6 foot wide. So doing that, then we end up with a 16-foot screen porch out to out and a deck that's about 11.6 or so. Whether you lay this out for the perfect overhang here is up to your own insanity. By the way, I show these are 2x6 floor joists, and this is a 2x8 band joist, and I was just thinking you could take either this decking and nail it to the back of this vertically. Probably have to have some sort of little subframe at the bottom to keep that from getting too wobbly, but some sort of skirting or otherwise to block that off. Here, by the way, is that 4x4 passing as a rafter at 29.25 inches on center. And so, except for the fact that at the end I shift both of these beams, the double LVLs and the double 2x8s, all those members cut to 7 inches. I shift those to the center of this bearing on each of those on the plan. And we just horsed around with box beams and whatnot. So at the soffit sides, we have this extra plate here. This is gone because these are 7 inches high. But we have this extra plate projecting forward, again based on that photograph of that, and it still is a decent enough way to terminate the rafters into this and terminate the beam cladding into that. This projects into the room. This is a 2x8 on top, and these are 2x6s. And so, but at the gable end, because that has more of an exposure, you are going to do something special and have that nosing project outward as well as inward. And at the top, these are the rafters here, and I just have a piece of 2x cedar fastened to the bottom of that with some sub-blocking coming out here. How we're going to hold that rake end up, I don't know whether you put a 2x6 on top of this beam, have that as your ridge beam on top of our main beam, have a 2x6 and have it sit on top of that and just project out here to pick up these fly rafters. But that is the relevant section on that gable end. To briefly explain the floor plan or the foundation plan, this is the largest pier or footing, 24x24. All these other square ones are 20x20. These square piers coming up here are 12x12, where the columns come through. Any of the round ones you see are 12-inch round, except when it's called out. This one has to be 16 inches round because this is the heavy load here, and we need 3-inch clearance for that connector. So when you come up with a pedestal here, it either has to be a 12-inch square like the rest of these, or if you're going to come up with a round one, it has to be a 16-inch diameter. And these are the only other two with footings, because these have pretty heavy loads on them. Some of them, you can see this one in particular. This was back when I was using 3 across here, 2, just the 1. So we have balanced things out now a little bit more. And what I've done here is that This central beam, we'll start with the central beam, beam E, and it just bears on top of little short column and base and cap assemblies here and here, and then it suspends. All of these beams that go this way suspend at the columns that interrupt them. So beam D, E, and C, they all suspend at these columns with that hanger called out, as well as they suspend at that one, this one. So these are all just suspended beams here. These bear on these two columns but are suspended there. This one is suspended here, bears, suspended, suspended, bears, and all of them just use a hanger back at the band joist, since our floor surface is going to be so high. 2x6 is over at 16 or 12 inches on center. 16 will work, but you said 12, so that's what they're shown as. And this is kind of what it is from underneath. Then you could see where these, whatever those those have actually been reduced. Those are 2x8s in the final analysis. Everything, all these beams are 2x8s, double 2x8s. The band joist is 2x8 as well, and then the joist, the floor joists, are 2x6s. But yes, hangers back at the wall. This is not a 2x12, it's 2x8, and you can see the hangers are mostly going to be up in that plate and the band joist. And I just now noticed that I wasn't even showing the footings for each of these. These are all the pedestals, the necessary pedestals that come up, but then here are the footings, all of these 20x20s, all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 20x20s, and the 24x24. These actually require footing. That's about whatever it's called out on the plan, 16 inches I think. But all these little ones, they don't need a footing, obviously. You could just drill down, and those can be just 12-inch borings. These are just some 9s shown. I don't know how you like to do your stairs, but I like those to not be flopping around up and down on the ground. So I show these little cores down to below 32 inches below grade, and then a slab with some steel in it poured over, with your stringers coming down on top of that. I know it is noisy here, but I'm trying to get this film out to you before it's entirely irrelevant. This wall was called out by that door, and you can see you have a couple inches to move, because by the time I put everything together, I decided these here, I'm not going to suspend those with concealed hangers. I'm going to mount that last joist on the outside of these, and then have my decking project an inch beyond that, with those outside band joists just being fastened with screws to these, since they're carrying nothing. And then this was when I was doing this stain thing, this was kind of the first finished look, or the first point where I got it to where it was a structure. And I decided to pull that overhang back to 12 or 14 inches. This was a whole series of investigation on the corner and the various caps, and how to deal with those rafters at the top again, what we're going to use to hold those down. And I went round and round with that, and finally I had shown, for a moment I had shown these lag screws just down through the top of the rafter in the dead center and coming into the LVL. I don't even think those are necessary, and I've eliminated them from the most recent plan. I think you can just use your screw fasteners, construction screws, not drywall screws, here, and then either with a plywood ridge board that runs through, or 2x blocking that runs between them, or what I show as 2x ridge board that continues on, because we did have that rake end to address. This whole next, and will be the final section of this film, is all just a review of this outside once we get the structure together, and kind of eliminating a few things here and there, and playing with the colors, changing that to what you had indicated, which was all this was going to be the color of the solid house. So, but we went from this then to this as a starting point. This, Greg had originally talked about running LVLs up beside this 6x6 to cap the side of that glue lamp at the top. With the connectors we're using, that's really not necessary. So I kind of have I started by going with a bare minimum on that. First, the downspouts will go out here at the end, like this. But then, the first thing I did was, I thought this was a little heavy, or not necessary in any event, so I trimmed that down some like this. And I believe this is the permutation I show on the current floor plans. But I went ahead and messed around with, because I wasn't sure, maybe Kim originally thought that was just going to be a couple triangles up there. I can live with either of those. And then we go to putting your colors in on the outside, at least on the outside all the way, and then just doing the rafters, and that's around. Since all that is cedar and can be stained as easy as painted, that is kind of where the final look from out here. So this is what I show on the plans, where I've widened this one out to 9. This is 9, 5.5, 7 1/4, or 5 1/4 and 7 1/4. From the inside, the same progression of stain or differences where we eliminate narrow. You can see that column looks pretty chunky in here, and with our connectors, none of that is required. Now here I was the most narrow, where we just had straight cladding on the side of that, cedar cladding on the side of it. But at the end, I beefed that out just a little bit. It looked a little weak with just an inch up here. But this was just the different interior looks, and then coloring everything with the paint color and leaving the wood roof. And there's that final move. In skylighting, I just want to cover this briefly. This plan does not lend itself to skylighting very easily, and I'll show you if skylighting was even under consideration. But because of our rafter spacing, we can't use a wider skylight like one that would normally be for 32 inches on center. So we have to go to 22s to start with. And to put them, you could see if I try to put a pair anywhere in here that there's an imbalance. So I think the minimum a person can do if they were going to try to add skylights to this and have it look good is maybe these 4 on the east side, or these 4 down south, or the 8 of them. But I did want to make a review of that because there was a concern about it getting dark inside. And these skylights can range, you have plenty of ventilation, so you really don't need them ventilating. So the cheapest of these is going to be about $3.50 a piece. So you can see if you did all 8, you're going to be into a substantial amount of money. But I thought it was important to review it, and so that's why it was shown. I had originally wanted to investigate skylights simply because in this sort of construction it's so easy to install them. There's no well, they're just cutting through this diaphragm. But the fact that the only way it looks good is to put 4 or 8, it kind of works against it. From this direction, then, with these color changes, a little bit of a stutter step, but there is what you have specified. Again, the bottom of this beam might look a little high in relation to this, but remember, when you look at this Centaur screen, it's going to be a little bit of a different situation from that end. Now there is, you can see how it's unbalanced. On this side you don't pick it up as much because of the wide Centaur screen, but on this side it almost demands 2 or none, like this. And you can see light does come in, and you do get 10 times the light through a horizontal thing like this as you do through a window opening. And here's where you can see if you lower this window head, this beam bottom, to be closer to the top of these, this center is going to be coming down below that. So that's why that's shown there. And we had space up by the windows there, so why not have the height? And I think that is about it. Don't drill the beam. You're going to have to, you can't drill that glue lamb, by the way, through the top for ceiling fans. So if you're going to put ceiling fans, the wire is going to have to travel on the bottom of it in a nice conduit or something like that, because even putting a 1-inch hole through it, we can't do that. So do not drill the beam, and hopefully this has shown you enough that you can know whether you want to apply for the variance or not, or build it or not. And that is that. It's been great fun. Hopefully we get this thing accomplished. Thank you.